What if the sound of your childhood held a love that time tried to silence? I am an old piano, one of those dark wood ones that sit in the corner of a forgotten room, but I was once the heart of a house, the confidant of a girl with big, silent eyes, and the only one who heard the song of a love that was born without words, crossed time, pain, silence, and even so, never stopped playing. This is the story of Bela and Dante, told by me, who played what no one else heard, and who waited for years for the return of one last note, the one that only true love is capable of finishing. Stay with me until the end, because sometimes, what seems lost is just waiting for the right time to be remembered. I remember the first time she touched my fingers, with small, clumsy hands, but with a silence in her eyes that screamed louder than any note I could emit. Her name was Bela, and she was about 7 years old when her father placed her in front of me, a little awkwardly, saying that music could be good for her head, that it might help calm her thoughts, as if the noise of the world outside were lighter than the chaos inside a child who had already seen more sadness than joy. The house was old, the windows creaked, the walls held muffled secrets, but it was in the corner of the living room, between a faded sofa and a rug that always smelled of rain, that she found me, or maybe it was I who found her, because from that day on, I knew that everything that would happen there, everything she would feel, think or love, would pass through me first. At first, she would only touch me with her hands when she thought no one was looking, and she would press the lower keys, as if she were looking for something hidden beneath them, a sound that would reveal something that not even she could name. Her parents fought a lot. They spoke too softly when they wanted to hide, and too loudly when they could no longer pretend, and when her mother's crying mixed with the sound of the rain on the roof, it was to me that Bela ran. "You understand me, right?" she whispered, her fingers trembling over the keys, as if each note was a word she never had the courage to say out loud. I responded with soft chords, with minor keys, with songs that she invented on the spot, without knowing that she was composing the map of her own soul, a song of survival that only I heard in its entirety. The days passed, the months too, and the more the world around her seemed to break, the more she grew inside me. At 9, I could already play by ear anything I heard just once. At 10, I composed melodies so sweet and sad that they made the house itself fall silent, as if every piece of furniture knew it needed to hear that, as if everything there breathed through music. It was also around this time that he first appeared. Dante, the new neighbor next door, with messy hair, a curious look, and that way of someone who still didn't understand how the world worked, but already suspected that the heart could be stronger than any explanation. Bela saw him through the window, the day the moving truck arrived, and for a moment, her fingers stopped on my keys, as if she felt that something was about to change, that the music would no longer be just hers. Who could he be? She murmured, and began to play again, more slowly, as if she wanted him to listen. And he listened. For weeks, Dante would sit on the porch, a notebook on his lap, listening to every note that Bela drew from me, sometimes smiling to himself, sometimes closing his eyes as if the sound took him to a place he didn't even know existed. Until one day he rang the doorbell. "Are you the one playing that piano?" he asked shyly, his eyes shining as if he were seeing a star up close. "I am," Bela replied, hiding her face behind her hair, as if she didn't know how to deal with compliments, or perhaps with presents. Can I listen closely?" She hesitated for a few seconds, looking around as if expecting someone to say no, but the house was strangely silent that day, as if even her parents had taken a break from their sadness. "You can, but you have to be quiet," she said, and took him to me. That day, something changed, and I felt as if the notes gained color, as if the sound became lighter, more full of life, as if each key she pressed was also a word that he understood, even without needing a translation. "How do you do that?" he asked, looking amazed. "How do you know what sound to make?" "I don't know," she replied, "I just feel." And he smiled. From that moment on, Dante began to visit Belle almost every day, sometimes just to listen, sometimes with a piece of paper where he wrote poems inspired by her songs, other times just to sit next to her, in silence, sharing the bench with me as if that space were the only safe place in the world. I witnessed it all. From the first look that lasted longer than it should have, from the first laugh that came out between one note and another, from the first time their hands touched by accident as they changed positions on the bench. I was the one who heard, before anyone else, the melody that was born between two hearts that were still so small, but that already knew how to love in the purest way. "Do you think we'll be friends forever?" he asked once, while she improvised a slow, almost sad song. "I don't know," she replied, "but if it's not, I'll remember you in every song I play." And it was like this, with this unspoken promise, with this friendship that little by little was dressed in love, that it all began. I, the old piano in the corner of the room, saw the first chapter of a story that time would try to erase, but that memory, that one, never let die. Dante arrived as if he didn't want anything, but little by little, he became everything. There was something in the way he listened that made even silence seem like music. He didn't talk much, he wasn't the type to impose himself or seek attention, but every time he sat on that wooden bench next to Belle, something invisible calmed down inside her. It was as if the world, for a few moments, stopped weighing him down. They didn't need to say much, and perhaps that's why they understood each other so well. Bella, with her eyes always attentive and her hands that danced over my keys as if they were telling secrets with each note. Dante, with that worn notebook where he wrote down loose words, incomplete sentences, drawings of landscapes he'd never seen. And in the middle of them, silent when I needed to be, profound when they asked me to be, present even on the days when no one dared to speak. "Can I write here while you play?" he asked one day, and she just nodded, already focused on a melody that seemed to come from a very ancient place inside her. "This smells like autumn," he murmured after a while. "Smell? It has the color of dry leaves, you know? Of cold wind coming in through the crack in the window, and the sound of the world outside getting far away, very far away." She stopped playing for a second and looked at him strangely, as if no one had ever understood exactly what she meant by the song. And in that moment, she knew. She knew that he heard differently, that he heard her completely. The days passed like pages in a secret diary. Each meeting they had was a new page, a new song. Dante began writing short lyrics for Belle's songs, and together they created something that was just theirs, a song that had no chorus, a story that needed no ending. "Do you know what I wanted?" he said one day, lying on the living room floor while Belle strummed a sad sequence of chords. "What? I wanted to keep this sound inside a bottle, so I could open it whenever I wanted to hear you." She laughed, but didn't answer. She just played one more note, lower, sweeter, more intimate. And he understood, that was her, me too. And I was filled by each exchange, by each shared silence, by each touch that they pretended not to notice. Because at that age, love is still fear disguised as friendship, it is still care disguised as routine. One afternoon, Dante arrived with something wrapped in newspaper. A gift, shy and simple, but it made Belle's eyes shine. "It's for you," he said, holding it out. She opened it carefully and found a sheet of sheet music, handwritten. At the top, written in crooked letters, was the title, "The Music That Only I Hear." "Did you write this?" "You touched it. I just translated it." She clutched the paper to her chest and was silent for a few seconds. "Promise you'll never forget this song?" "I promise," he replied, "but only if you promise you'll never stop playing." And in that moment, even without knowing it, they made a pact. An agreement between souls who still don't understand what they are experiencing, but feel that it is bigger than them. That night, Belle didn't sleep. She sat up late next to me, running her fingers over the keys as if thanking me for having introduced her to someone who listened to what adults didn't. And as she played, something new blossomed. Something sweet, almost frightening, like the first time you realize that your heart can miss you even before you lose. I already felt what was coming, because the sound that is born from a love like this doesn't last only in presence. It echoes even after silence. That room was a universe apart, where time flowed differently, where the pains of the house seemed to stay outside, waiting for the music to end so they could come back in. It was there, in that narrow space between the piano and the worn sofa, that Bela and Dante created a refuge. A world of their own, where each note was a word and each melody a secret. Dante started arriving earlier, leaving later, and sometimes even making up excuses to stay a little longer. He said he was coming to study, but he never brought books, just his old notebook and his head full of dreams. And Bella, who had barely spoken before, started talking more to him. With me, she continued to open up through the keys, but now, she also shared with her voice what before only music had known. "You know, sometimes I feel like I don't belong anywhere," she said one afternoon, as she played a slow, drawn-out melody, as if each note carried the weight of a memory. "Like this? Here at home, no one really listens. Only you," and she pointed at me, "and now you," and looked at Dante with a half-smile. He remained silent, looking at her as if he wanted to hug her without touching her, as if he understood but knew he couldn't fix everything. "You belong here," he said, "in this sound, in this room, in this music that you invent. I belong here too, you know? With you." She didn't answer. She just looked away, a little embarrassed, and continued playing, her eyes watering and her fingers lighter than ever. It was there that something was born that no one saw, that no one knew, that only I witnessed in its entirety. A silent, delicate love, made of chords and pauses, of accidental touches and contained laughter. There was no kiss, there were no vows, but there was a presence between them that spoke more than any gesture. It was the kind of love that doesn't need to be said to be felt. "Shall we compose together?" he asked one day, his eyes shining. "How?" "You play, and I write. But for real, as if it were our story. A song that only we understand." She thought for a moment, then nodded. And that was the beginning of a ritual that would last for weeks. Every day for an hour, they would create together. She would improvise harmonies, he would make up lyrics, sometimes he would scribble little drawings to match the sounds. It was an endless conversation, where sound was the language and emotion was the response. "This part sounds like when you're sad," he said, as she played a more tense sequence. "That's because it really is," she replied, without needing to explain. "And this one?" he asked, pointing to a sweeter melody. "This is when you arrive." And at that moment, the air in the room became denser, as if everything there had understood that something was being born. Something fragile, but immense. "You make me want to stay," he whispered, as if she wasn't supposed to hear. But she listened. And even without saying anything, she kept those words inside her as if they were a promise. One of those that we don't even know if it will last, but that warms the soul just by existing. One afternoon, while the two were deep in composition, Belle's father entered the room without knocking. The sound of the real world invaded their space like thunder. He looked at Dante suspiciously, frowned, and asked sharply, "What is this boy doing here again?" Bella swallowed hard, her hands stopping in midair, the notes of the music dying without conclusion. He's my friend," she replied, trying to sound firm. "This is no place to play," my father said, pointing at me. "This piano is expensive, it's not a kid's toy." Dante stood up immediately, his face red, his eyes on the ground. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice low, "I was just leaving anyway." He quickly grabbed the notebook and left without looking back. Bella stood there, still, her fingers still hovering over the keys, as if she didn't know what else to play. And I wanted to be able to speak, I wanted to be able to shout that this was no joke, that there was something true there, but all I could manage was to release a low, lonely note that echoed for too many seconds in the emptiness of the room. That day, Belle didn't play anymore. And the next few days, neither did she. The house went silent again and I felt empty, as if the most beautiful sound I had ever known had been ripped from me. But it was only for a while. Because 2 days later, Dante came back. And he came with flowers. Simple ones, picked from the front garden. And a shy smile, which hid the fear of no longer being welcome. "I brought this for you," and he stopped, embarrassed. "I wrote a new lyric. It's about that day we invented the wind song." She took the flowers, held the paper, and without saying anything, sat down next to me. Her fingers hesitated for a second, and then they began to play. First one note, then another, until the melody returned. More mature, more intense. As if everything they had been through had given the music a new layer. "I want to stay too," she said, finally. And I knew they had started listening to each other again. That year's summer arrived hotter than the others, and it seemed like time had slowed down just to give Belle and Dante more space to exist within their own feelings, as if the outside world had understood that there, in that house with tall windows and an old piano, something precious was blossoming and could not be rushed. They no longer met just because of the music. Sometimes, he would come just to sit next to her and share the silence, because the silence between two people who love each other is different. It welcomes, soothes, doesn't need to fill anything. It just exists. And that was new for both of them. One morning, Dante arrived looking different. His eyes were swollen, as if he had been crying all night, and there was a folded envelope in his pants pocket. He sat down on the piano bench as he always did, but this time he didn't open his notebook or talk about music. He just stood there, staring straight ahead, as if the world had stopped making sense. Did something happen? Belle asked, playing a soft note, almost like a caress. He didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket, took out the envelope, but didn't hand it over. "We're moving," he said finally, "at the end of the week." She froze. Her fingers stopped in midair, the sound suddenly dead, as if the air in the room had been knocked out by the news. "Like this? My father, he was transferred. They've already packed up almost everything." She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with eyes full of everything that couldn't be put into words. And then, as if she didn't want to let it become true, Bella started to play. An unknown melody, new, raw, a mix of anger, sadness, and despair. It was like a trapped scream, as if she was trying to stop the game with sound. "Is there nothing I can do?" she asked, her fingers trembling over me. "I tried," he murmured, "but it's not up to us, Bella." She stopped. She was silent for a moment too long, as if she were trying to hide herself inside him. "And our music? And all this?" Dante looked at her, and for a moment, the calm boy gave way to a broken boy. "I wrote to you," he said, finally handing over the envelope. "Don't read it now. Read it after I'm gone." She picked up the paper carefully, as if it were made of glass, and placed it inside the piano bench, among the old music books. "Are you coming back?" she asked in the lowest voice she had ever used. "I don't know," he replied, looking at the floor, "but if I don't come back, you need to keep playing, okay?" She nodded slowly, without promising anything. And then, as if they both knew it was the last time, they sat side by side and played together. No words, no plans, just music. They played everything they had lived. They played their childhood, their first love, the silences they understood. They played until the sound became tears. And when the last note echoed, it was as if time stopped for a few seconds, and then collapsed all at once. That night, Bella didn't sleep. She sat in the dark next to me and let her hands wander over the keys in silence, as if his absence already weighed on her before it even happened. And I, even though I was made of wood and strings, felt my body vibrate with her pain. The next day he didn't show up. Not in the other. The street grew quieter, as if it had forgotten how to breathe. The front garden seemed drier, the walls of the house colder. Belle spent days going to the window, waiting. But the change had already happened. The house next door was empty, and with it, a part of her too. She came back to me with dry eyes, but her soul in disarray. She stood up, picked up the envelope, and then put it back. She didn't have the courage to read it. Not at that moment. Maybe she thought that if she didn't read it, his departure wouldn't be real yet. "I won't play anymore," she whispered, her voice small, as if she were talking to herself, but I heard it, and my wooden heart broke a little. And she did. For weeks, maybe months, Bella didn't touch me. She would walk past me without looking, as if I were a reminder of everything she had lost. The music turned to silence. The house, a place where love left traces, but didn't stay. And I waited. I waited every day, every night, for a touch, for a note, for a memory. And time passed like pain passes. Slowly at first, then so fast that we don't even notice when it stopped hurting and became just longing. Time has a cruel way of continuing even when we stop inside. And that's what happened to Bella. She grew up. She grew up without me, without him, without music. She grew up like someone who learns to survive carrying an invisible weight on their back, the kind that no one sees, but that warps the soul as the years go by. The girl with big eyes and sensitive fingers gave way to a more reserved, more practical, more silent young woman. And I stayed. I stayed there, in the same corner of the room, covered by a thick sheet that prevented even the dust from comforting me. Years were like that. Years in which birthdays passed without candles, Christmases without songs, and the days dragged on like seasons that had been badly lived. The house changed, the furniture was changed, but I remained quiet, forgotten, like an old chapter in a book that no one rereads anymore. Belle's mother fell ill, and with her illness came an even deeper sadness. Her father, who had been distant before, fell into a cold silence. And Belle cared for her mother with the same delicacy with which she once cared for my keyboards, but now without music, without pause, without rest. "It will pass, I'm here," she said, and it was beautiful to see that the affection still lived in her, even after everything. But at night, when the house slept, it was in the dark room that Belle wept. I heard it. Every muffled sob, every breath cut in half, as if she allowed herself to break only when no one else was watching. Sometimes I felt the floor vibrate with the pent-up sound of her pain. And every vibration reminded me of Dante. Remembered the shared bench, the scribbled sheet music, the wordless promises. The envelope was still inside me, untouched, as if keeping that letter was the last way to keep alive the possibility that it hadn't all been a dream. But she never opened it, and as time went by, I think she even forgot it was there. Years later, her mother left, and with her departure, the house was definitely empty. Bella, now in her early 20s, decided it was time to leave too. She sold the furniture, packed boxes, and sorted out memories. Each room held a different memory and silence. And when she came to me, she hesitated. She slowly removed the sheet, as if waking something that had been asleep for a long time. She ran her hand over the wooden top with affection and melancholy. I felt it. I felt her touch like a hug that we have waited for years. "You're still here, right?" she murmured, and it was the first time she had spoken to me in a long, long time. She sat down on the bench, took a deep breath, but her fingers didn't touch the keys. They just rested without courage. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought that maybe, just maybe, she would play again. "I can't," she whispered, "not without him." And he stood up. I stood there, alone once again. When she moved, I was left behind. I didn't fit in the new apartment, she said. And maybe she didn't even want to take me with her. There was something too painful about carrying me. So I stayed. I stayed in the empty house, now truly silent, without children's laughter, without music, without anyone. Just me and time. The years passed slowly after that. So many other hands touched me, but none were like hers. Some tried to tune my strings, others drew soulless sounds, but none sat on my bench as she did. None heard me as Dante or she heard me. But destiny has its own score. One day, many years later, I heard different footsteps in the house. The sound of the door being unlocked, the late afternoon light invading the room as it used to. It was her. Beautiful. Older, more serious, but still with that same silence in her eyes. She entered slowly, as if stepping into a field of memories. She looked at everything with an air of someone who didn't know if she was dreaming or returning. "My God," she murmured, walking around the room. He saw me in the corner, covered in dust, a little more worn out, but intact. "You're still here?" She came closer, ran her hand over me like before, and this time, sat down. The bench still creaked the same way. And before touching anything, she opened the lid. That's when he found the letter. The envelope was yellowed, but sealed. Her name written in Dante's crooked handwriting was still visible. She trembled. "I don't believe it," he whispered, his voice breaking. She looked at the paper as if she had found a piece of her heart that she thought she had lost. She stood there for a few seconds that seemed like hours. Then she opened it. Her hands were shaking so much that the paper almost fell to the floor. But she read it. She read it all. And as she read, her eyes filled with tears, her chest rising and falling as if she was finally breathing after years of being trapped. And when she was done, she looked at me. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. He loved me. And then, as if in a gesture of reunion with herself, Bella placed her hands on my keys and played. She played as before, as she should never have stopped. And the sound, it was the same, but now more mature, more full of pain, but also of light. Time has a cruel way of continuing even when we stop inside. And that's what happened to Bella. She grew up. She grew up without me, without him, without music. She grew up like someone who learns to survive carrying an invisible weight on their back, the kind that no one sees, but that warps the soul as the years go by. The girl with big eyes and sensitive fingers gave way to a more reserved, more practical, more silent young woman. And I stayed. I stayed there, in the same corner of the room, covered by a thick sheet that prevented even the dust from comforting me. Years were like that. Years in which birthdays passed without candles, Christmases without songs, and the days dragged on like seasons that had been badly lived. The house changed, the furniture was changed, but I remained quiet, forgotten, like an old chapter in a book that no one rereads anymore. Belle's mother fell ill, and with her illness came an even deeper sadness. Her father, who had been distant before, fell into a cold silence. And Belle cared for her mother with the same delicacy with which she once cared for my keyboards, but now without music, without pause, without rest. "It will pass, I'm here," she said, and it was beautiful to see that the affection still lived in her, even after everything. But at night, when the house slept, it was in the dark room that Belle wept. I heard it. Every muffled sob, every breath cut in half, as if she allowed herself to break only when no one else was watching. Sometimes I felt the floor vibrate with the pent-up sound of her pain. And every vibration reminded me of Dante. Remembered the shared bench, the scribbled sheet music, the wordless promises. The envelope was still inside me, untouched, as if keeping that letter was the last way to keep alive the possibility that it hadn't all been a dream. But she never opened it, and as time went by, I think she even forgot it was there. Years later, her mother left, and with her departure, the house was definitely empty. Bella, now in her early 20s, decided it was time to leave too. She sold her furniture, packed boxes, and sorted out her memories. Each room held a different memory and silence. And when she came to me, she hesitated. She slowly removed the sheet, as if waking something that had been asleep for a long time. She ran her hand over the wooden top with affection and melancholy. I felt it. I felt her touch like a hug that we have waited for years. "You're still here, right?" she murmured, and it was the first time she had spoken to me in a long, long time. She sat down on the bench, took a deep breath, but her fingers didn't touch the keys. They just rested without courage. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought that maybe, just maybe, she would play again. "I can't," she whispered, "not without him." And he stood up. I stood there, alone once again. When she moved, I was left behind. I didn't fit in the new apartment, she said. And maybe she didn't even want to take me with her. There was something too painful about carrying me. So I stayed. I stayed in the empty house, now truly silent, without children's laughter, without music, without anyone. Just me and time. The years passed slowly after that. So many other hands touched me, but none were like hers. Some tried to tune my strings, others drew soulless sounds, but none sat on my bench as she did. None heard me as Dante or she heard me. But destiny has its own score. One day, many years later, I heard different footsteps in the house. The sound of the door being unlocked, the late afternoon light invading the room as it used to. It was her. Beautiful. Older, more serious, but still with that same silence in her eyes. She entered slowly, as if stepping into a field of memories. She looked at everything with an air of someone who didn't know if she was dreaming or returning. "My God," she murmured, walking around the room. He saw me in the corner, covered in dust, a little more worn out, but intact. "You're still here?" She came closer, ran her hand over me like before, and this time, sat down. The bench still creaked the same way. And before touching anything, she opened the lid. That's when he found the letter. The envelope was yellowed, but sealed. Her name written in Dante's crooked handwriting was still visible. She trembled. "I don't believe it," he whispered, his voice breaking. She looked at the paper as if she had found a piece of her heart that she thought she had lost. She stood there for a few seconds that seemed like hours. Then she opened it. Her hands were shaking so much that the paper almost fell to the floor. But she read it. She read it all. And as she read, her eyes filled with tears, her chest rising and falling as if she was finally breathing after years of being trapped. And when she was done, she looked at me. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. He loved me. And then, as if in a gesture of reunion with herself, Bella placed her hands on my keys and played. She played as before, as she should never have stopped. And the sound, it was the same, but now more mature, more full of pink, but also of light. That sound, it was impossible, but it was there. As Belle played, her eyes still wet from Dante's words, a soft melody, identical to the one they had composed together in childhood, passed through the air as if time had been folded in half, as if some invisible door had opened and let the past escape through the ancient walls of that street. She stopped playing instantly, her fingers suspended in the air, her heart racing in her chest, her eyes instinctively searching for the window. Outside, the late afternoon light fell slowly over the houses. And from one of them, on the other side of the street, the same one where Dante had lived, came the melody. Exactly that one. The sequence of simple notes, but so full of meaning that it seemed to carry everything that was unsaid, everything that was left behind. "No," she whispered, as if afraid of believing too much. He was unable to move for a few seconds. The sound continued. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't an illusion. It was someone playing their music. She stood up with a tight chest and went to the window. Her heart felt like it was going to rip through her ribs. It was that house, yes. The living room curtain was half open. The sound came from there, clear as a living memory. "It can't be him," she murmured. "Not after all this time." But it was. Deep in her heart, she knew. There was something about that sound that no other person could replicate. It was as if each note knew exactly where inside her it needed to hit. And only Dante could do that. Belle stood there for minutes, listening, her face pressed against the glass, her hands trembling. Then the sound stopped. And the silence returned. But now it was not empty. It was full of possibilities, as if time had finally stepped back and allowed love to breathe again. The next morning, she returned to that house. She stopped at the gate, hesitant, like a little girl again. The garden was different, but the smell was the same. Wet earth, jasmine. Just like when she was a child. She rang the doorbell, her heart in her throat. Silence. Then, slow footsteps. The door opened. And there, before her he stood. Taller. More grown-up. Hair still messy. Eyes the same. "Bella?" he said, as if her name were a song. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes already filling with tears. "I heard you yesterday," she said finally. "I heard our song." He took a step forward, slowly, as if he were afraid of breaking a dream. "And I heard you too," he replied. "I thought it was my head making it up, but it was you, right?" She smiled, and it was a smile of reunion with everything that had once been torn away. "I found your letter," she said, her voice breaking. "I had never read it before. I left it there on purpose," he confessed. "I thought that if you read it one day, maybe you would look for me." They were silent for a long moment, looking at each other as if they needed to relearn everything they had been. They were no longer children, but something about them was still the same. The music, the memory, the feeling. "Come in," he said, opening the door. She came in. The house was different, but there was something that still stood the test of time. The living room. The piano. "Is it the same?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he replied. "I brought it with me every time I moved. I never touched it with anyone. I only touched it yesterday because something told me you were close." She approached the piano, ran her fingers over the wood, felt the same cold, the same emotion. "Can I?" he asked, his eyes already shining. He nodded. And then, for the first time in years, they played together. Not like before. Now, with scars, with time, with everything they had learned in silence. The music was no longer innocent. It was profound. It was a return to what had never stopped being. As they played, their eyes met. And no words were needed, because some loves don't need to be explained, just lived. That afternoon seemed out of time. The light coming through the living room window was warmer, softer, as if the universe had stopped for a moment just to let that moment happen. Belle and Dante were still sitting side by side, as before, as it should always have been. His hands hovered over the keys, but it was his fixed gaze on Belle that said it all. She, on the other hand, had her eyes fixed on the piano bench, the same one where they sat, sharing space and silence. And it was there that she remembered. "The letter," she whispered, almost as if she were speaking to time. "Which letter?" The one you left for me. The day you left." He smiled at the corner of his mouth, a smile that mixed regret and hope. "Did you read it?" She nodded slowly, her eyes filling up again. "Years later, when I came home and heard you again, it was there, exactly where you left it. Kept in the bank, among the sheet music. I almost went back the next day," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I kept waiting for a sign from you. A note, a sound, anything. But nothing came. And I thought, she must have moved on." "I thought the same thing," she said, her eyes fixed on his, "that you forgot. That you never loved me like that." He took a deep breath, as if he needed to release air that had been held in for years. "I loved you, Belle. I loved you so much that I could no longer play music with anyone. No woman, no story, nothing sounded like you." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight and beauty of that sentence. It was everything she needed to hear. Everything she had waited a lifetime to know. "That letter," she began, her voice low, "do you remember what you wrote?" "Every word," he replied, looking at her as if he were going back in time. She stood up and walked to the window, trying to control the emotions bubbling in her chest. "If you ever read this," you wrote, "I want you to know that you are the only song I never finished. That it still echoes in me every night. That I would give anything to go back and play what was left unfinished between us." He stood up too, slowly, as if he didn't want to spoil the moment. "And you, Belle? If you could have answered me back then, what would you have said?" She looked at him with full eyes, her heart open, her words ready for so long. "That I heard you, even when you were no longer there. That every note I didn't play, I played for you. That my silence was also love, only painful, lost, but never absent." Dante took a step towards her, and the two stood face to face, as if time was testing whether it was really true. If after everything they still fit together. "We wasted so much time," he murmured. "Maybe," she replied, taking his hands, "but maybe we came back at exactly the right time." They stood there, looking at each other, feeling the touch of their hands, the reunion of their skins, the warmth that came not only from emotion, but from a story that never stopped being written, even with missing pages. "Can I ask you something?" he said with a shy, boyish smile. "Anything. Play it for me. The song from the letter. The one you started but never finished." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and returned to the piano. She sat down slowly, ran her hands over me affectionately, as if thanking me for the memory, for keeping what she herself had tried to forget. And then she played. First came the soft notes of childhood, the same ones they had created together, in the living room of the house where it all began. Then came the longer pauses, as if each silence carried the weight of waiting. And then a new melody, one they had never played together, but which had been there, inside her, all along. It was the answer, the conclusion, the part of the song that had been pending, finally being played. Dante watched her as if he were watching a miracle. His eyes were teary, his hands clenched, his chest too full to contain just himself. And when she finished, everything went silent for a moment. A good silence. Alive. He walked over, knelt down beside her, and took her hand. "Can we start over?" She smiled, and it wasn't just any smile. It was the smile of someone who, even after so many absences, still believes in love. "We never broke up." The sound still hung in the air, as if refusing to die. That last note, played by Bella with her eyes closed and her heart completely surrendered, was like an embrace that extended beyond the body, beyond time, as if the strings that vibrated within me knew that they had ended a cycle. Dante was beside her, his hands intertwined with hers on the keys, and they both seemed still, but inside, they were in motion, navigating through memories, through pain, through longing that was now beginning to become presence. "I thought that note would never come," he said, smiling with his eyes. "G sharp, remember?" She laughed softly, that laugh that only he knew. "You always said that G sharp was a sad note trying to be happy." And now, it seemed she found the right tone. They stood there, on that bench that had once witnessed their first accidental touch, their first whispered poem, now sharing something much deeper. The certainty that, even with all the interruptions, their music had never really been interrupted. It was just waiting for the moment to continue. "We've changed so much," Bella said, looking to the side at him, "and at the same time, there's something about you that's still exactly the same. The way I still get nervous when you look at me? That too," she smiled, "but it's more than that. It's this calm, this comfortable silence, this way of listening to me, as if it were music." Dante came closer, touched her face gently, like someone touching a dream, afraid of waking up. "Your music, Bella. You always have been. Even in silence." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words wash over her like a slow melody. When she opened them, there were tears, but not of sadness, not of pain. They were sweet tears, like gentle rain after a drought that had gone too long. "And now?" she asked, "what do we do with all this?" He thought for a few seconds, looking around, as if searching for the answer in the walls that had seen them grow. "We start from the beginning, with what's left of the two of us, and rebuild. Calmly, carefully, without rushing. Are you afraid?" "I do. But I'm more afraid of not trying. Of losing you again." She took a deep breath. The piano was still vibrating slightly, as if each of their words resonated within me. And in that moment she understood. She understood that everything she had been through, all the years of silence, all the days she thought she would never love again, was all just a path. A preparation for that reunion. "I never stopped playing inside, you know? Even without touching you. I kept playing mentally. On bad days, I imagined our melodies. And that was what kept me going." "I know," he replied, his voice breaking. "I also touched you in my silence." That's when Dante got up, went to an old cabinet and came back with a small notebook with a blue cover. "I've kept this all these years." She took the notebook in her hands and recognized it immediately. It was his lyrics notebook, the one he used as a child, where he scribbled poems and songs with crude drawings in the margins. When she opened it, she felt a thud. It was full. Each page a song. Each line, a piece of her. All this? Every song I never got to show you. Every attempt to not forget you. She looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and hugged him. A tight, long hug, like someone who has finally found a home after so much time lost. "I don't want to waste any more time, Dante. I don't want to let fear decide for me anymore. Neither do I. Let's make our love a song that doesn't need an end." And there, in that room where it all began, in front of me, the old piano that never stopped waiting, the two embraced as if it were the first time. And perhaps it was. Because now there was maturity. Now there was truth. In the weeks that followed, they began to compose again. Together, Bella opened a small music school in the city. Dante began to write for her, with her, about her. I began to be touched every day again. I began to breathe through her hands again. I became what I had always been, part of this story. And every time they played, the music that only I hear, the song that began with glances in childhood, was lost in time and was reborn between reunions, I knew. I knew that their love was living proof that there are things that time does not erase, only prepares. That there are sounds that never die, they just wait for the right moment to return. In the end, I understood. Some loves are like rare notes. Sometimes they go out of tune, sometimes they disappear, but when they return in tune with time and ready to last a lifetime.